I'd heard the neighbor next door had an alpha son whose pheromones made him really short-tempered. The night before school started, my mom stopped me and said, "Be careful, don't get into trouble with him." "I got it," I said. Back in my old class, I'd always been the invisible kid. Naturally, I didn't expect my life to suddenly get exciting just because I'd moved. But the next morning, right when I stepped out the door, I saw the gate of the villa across the street swing open too. A tall guy walked out. His school uniform hung loosely on him, a small earring glinted on his ear, and his eyes were filled with defiance and irritation, as if his whole body was warning, "Mess with me and you'll regret it." He was really good-looking, but absolutely not someone to provoke. Still, he controlled his pheromones well. I couldn't smell anything from him at all. Out of politeness, I nodded and introduced myself. "Hi, I'm David. I just moved in." He pressed his lips together and stared at me without answering. After a long moment, his brows suddenly tightened. My heart skipped. Seriously? Is his temper so bad that even someone greeting him puts him in a bad mood? I forced out an awkward laugh, lowered my head, and hurried toward the subway station. Barely a few seconds passed before I heard footsteps behind me, steady, unhurried. He had long legs. Keeping up with me was effortless for him. Honestly, he walked with the relaxed confidence of someone strolling through his own garden. But one thing confused me. Wasn't there a car parked in front of his house? I thought he had a driver who took him to school. So even though he lived in a giant villa, he took the subway like me. It was rush hour, and the subway was packed. I had just found a slightly less crowded spot and steadied myself. Before I could turn around, someone stepped in behind me. He was tall, at least a head taller than me, and he placed his hands on the handrails on both sides of me. Suddenly, I was trapped in this strange little triangle, the subway door in front of me, and that tall guy behind me. I tilted my head the tiniest bit and immediately recognized his sharp jawline. My new neighbor. He was staring at me again, still with that irritated, unsettled expression. Silently, I lowered my gaze and tugged at my backpack strap. I didn't notice that doing so exposed the back of my neck, my gland. Was it my imagination, or was he leaning closer and closer? We'd just reached the transfer station. A lot of people had gotten off already. There was no reason for him to stand this close. The next second, a chill shot down my spine. I felt it. His breath, warm and light, brushing over my gland. Again and again. This wasn't my imagination. I snapped my head around. My new neighbor was still staring with those sharp phoenix eyes of his. Because of my strange pheromone situation, no alpha had ever shown interest in my gland before. But I'd read enough news to know. Could my new neighbor really be the type who gets triggered just by seeing an omega? I stammered. "Time to get off." That was the first thing I ever heard him say. His voice was a little rough, unexpectedly brushing right against my heart. "I'm Brandon," he added. "Let's get along." I was thrown off balance by Brandon's blunt attitude. I started to wonder if I had completely misunderstood him just now. He really didn't look like some creep. We walked into school one after the other. Besides saying his name, Brandon only asked me one question. "What class are you in?" After I told him, he didn't say another word, but I still figured something out. My new neighbor seemed to be the school bully, because as we walked, plenty of students greeted him, with polite smiles. Brandon didn't respond to a single one, so I became even more convinced the subway thing was all in my head. A school bully couldn't possibly be a creep. No way. After checking in with the teacher, I picked up my new uniform and got a quick tour of the school. Just before class started, the teacher brought me to my room. "Hi everyone, I'm David." As I finished introducing myself, I immediately spotted my new neighbor sitting in the back corner. Great, we were in the same class. The teacher assigned me a seat. As soon as I sat down, my deskmate leaned over curiously. "I heard you're an Omega." "Yeah, me too," he said with a wink. "What do your pheromones smell like?" It was the usual friendly Omega to Omega small talk. I said, "I'm not sure. How can you not know?" I tilted my head, thought for a second, then quietly released a bit of my pheromones. "Do you smell anything?" My deskmate looked baffled. "No. Also, why are you just casually releasing pheromones? There are tons of alphas in here." "Because no one has ever been able to smell mine since I was a kid," I shrugged. "So I don't really care." The moment I finished talking, a loud bang echoed across the classroom. I jumped, whipping my head around. My new neighbor was suddenly standing right in front of me, his expression dark as he stared down at me. "David, switch seats." Brandon jabbed a finger at the empty seat beside him, impatience written all over his face. "Move over there." 3. I had a feeling I was about to get bullied at school. Back at my old school, I'd at most been invisible, but no one ever bothered targeting me. Yet on my very first day after transferring, It seemed like I'd already offended the one guy I absolutely shouldn't. Right now that guy, the big boss of the school, was sitting beside me, flipping through his book so loudly the pages snapped like firecrackers. Then he turned and stared at me with clear irritation. All I could do was ask carefully, "Do you need something? Move closer. Why are you sitting so far away?" The two desks were pushed together, but I was huddled in the corner like some pitiful kid who'd been isolated, taking up barely any space. I didn't dare tell him the truth. Mostly I was scared that if I got too close and accidentally touched him, he'd punch me. There was a huge physical difference between an Omega and an Alpha. I felt like my tiny body wouldn't survive even one slap from Brandon. "What's that look for? I'm not gonna hit you." Brandon clearly wasn't happy that I was acting like he was dangerous. "Really? I never lay a hand on Omegas. It's true, I can vouch for him." Alan from the row in front turned around and raised his hand like he was swearing an oath. "You're our boss's first Omega deskmate." Was I supposed to feel honored? Because Brandon was being so obvious, I became famous on my first day of school. For someone who'd been invisible for over 10 years, this felt extremely weird. "But you really don't have a scent at all." Alan sniffed dramatically, wide-eyed. "Are you sure you're an Omega and not a Beta?" Even if my pheromones didn't have a smell, that question still felt rude. "What are you sniffing for? Are you a dog?" Brandon glared at Alan. I looked at Brandon in surprise. So the school bully wasn't actually a bully, he was kind. "Want a snack?" Brandon asked. "No." "Oh." He nodded, then asked again, "We have PE this afternoon. Want to watch me play basketball?" "I don't like being in the sun." "What do you like doing then?" "I like being alone." Every time I rejected Brandon, my classmates in front and to my right swallowed hard, like they were witnessing something terrifying. Holy crap, the transfer student actually rejected the school bully 3 times? He must have a death wish. And the bully isn't even mad? He usually hates those soft little Omegas the most. I vaguely heard them whispering, totally confused. Then Brandon asked the last question, "Want to go home together after school?" I nodded, "Sure." Everyone around us let out a collective sigh of relief. Oh, thank God he finally said yes. I was so scared if he said no again, the boss would snap and throw a punch. Yeah, if he got mad, none of us could stop him, but if we didn't try, we'd look like terrible classmates. I looked at my whispering classmates and really wanted to tell them I had perfectly good hearing. Plus, I honestly didn't think Brandon was as scary as they made him sound. I turned my head. The moment my gaze caught Brandon's sharp side profile, an unbelievable thought flashed through my mind. That thought reached its peak at lunch when Brandon not only got food for me but even handed me a fresh pressed juice that usually required a 20-minute line. I held it in until after school. When we were close to home, I finally couldn't resist. "Brandon, do you want to be friends with me?" Brandon stared at me, stunned, for a long moment. His gaze had a kind of pressure most people couldn't handle. Even I instinctively wanted to look away, but I held my ground. Brandon looked at the Omega standing in front of him, me. Thin, pale, wearing thick black-rimmed glasses, always keeping my head down. Not the type who drew attention. Compared to the school's bright, popular Omegas, I was like a tiny star hidden behind the moon, dim, barely noticeable. Yes, and no. I tilted my head in confusion. Brandon stepped closer, leaning down slightly. This time, he didn't suppress his pheromones. In an instant, a scorching wave of heat crashed into me like a burst of flames, making my cheeks burn. His dominant pheromones poured over me, so intense they almost felt solid. "Do you feel it, my pheromones?" I nodded weakly, barely able to stand. Brandon reached out, wrapped an arm around my waist, steadying me as he pulled his pheromones back. The air cleared a little, but the faint scent still lingered around my nose, like the smell of wood lightly charred by fire. Brandon lowered his head, enchanted. His nose brushed against my gland as he inhaled deeper and deeper, as if he wanted to carve my scent into his lungs. "You have a smell that calms me down." "Ha! Your pheromones smell like water. More accurately, like the cool, quiet fog in a damp forest." Just one breath, and that misty coolness slipped into his lungs and smothered the restless fire burning inside him. I blinked in surprise. So, my pheromones did have a scent. Realizing why Brandon was being so nice to me, I finally relaxed. I was happy. Happy that my pheromones could help someone, and happy that someone could finally smell them. "Does my scent feel good for you?" I asked, blinking, genuinely considerate. "Then I can release more. You can smell as much as you want." As a kind Omega, all I thought about was helping Brandon. I completely forgot how tempting that sounded coming from an Omega to an Alpha. Brandon's hand on my waist tightened instantly. "Ow," I gasped softly. "Sorry." His voice went rough for a second before he forced it back to normal. He straightened up and took a small step away from me. It's fine. Just stay with me more often. Okay. I smiled. If you need anything, just tell me. I can come find you anytime. Brandon's Adam's apple bobbed up and down several times as he swallowed back the desire rising in his chest. You promised. You're not allowed to back out. Seriously, can people not trust each other anymore? I'm not the type to break a promise. Relax. I patted my chest. I keep my word. Good. Brandon nodded. Then, can you give me a set of your pajamas? Ha, preferably ones you've worn a lot. Ones that have your pheromone scent on them. 5. To be honest, I may be naive, but I'm not stupid. This audio is originally produced by the YouTube channel, Omegaverse Tales Studio. Please credit when sharing. Brandon's request was hard not to misunderstand, but after spending a full day with him, I'd already formed a mental image of him, a grouchy school tyrant constantly tortured by his own pheromones. And a guy like that couldn't possibly be some kind of creep. Impossible. He must have just been feeling terrible and urgently needed an Omega's pheromones to soothe him. That had to be why he said something that sounded ambiguous. So I nodded. Okay, wait for me here. I'll go home and get it. The moment I ran off, Brandon nearly lost control of himself. Watching me obey so earnestly almost made him want to just scoop me up and run. I dashed home, dug out my Winnie the Pooh pajamas, and hurried back outside. If you're really uncomfortable, maybe you should just take a suppressor shot, I asked sincerely. Brandon took the pajamas, and it took every ounce of his willpower not to bury his face in them immediately. I'll manage, he said, voice low. Then if I can't sleep tonight, you can talk to me anytime. My mom called from the yard. David, dinner. I waved at Brandon. I'm heading home. Bye. Brandon watched my retreating back for several long seconds before finally turning around. At dinner, my mom's expression was heavy. David, I told you to stay away from the alpha next door. Mom, he's actually really nice. I automatically defended him. Her brows pinched. You don't know him. You don't know his past. That Brandon, he once damaged an Omega's gland. My eyes widened. In recent years, Omegas weren't as rare as before, and social norms had broadened, so many alphas chose betas as partners. But even then, intentionally harming an Omega's gland was a serious crime, enough to spend a lifetime in prison. Brandon isn't that kind of person. You've known him for one day. She snapped. He used his family's connections to avoid punishment, but that poor Omega's life was ruined forever. David, even if your pheromones have no scent, you're still physically an Omega. You're vulnerable. And someone like Brandon, someone who supposedly despises Omegas, if he ever lays a hand on you, you'd have no way to fight back. She took a deep breath. So promise me. Stay away from him, alright? 6. I didn't want to argue with my mom, so I nodded. But deep down, I didn't think Brandon was the type to hurt anyone's gland. The next morning, the moment I stepped outside, I saw him waiting at my door. I froze. My mom's words echoed in my head. I lowered my gaze awkwardly. What's wrong? Brandon immediately noticed my shift. And nothing. I shook my head. We walked to the subway just like yesterday. Only this time, Brandon was even closer than before. I stood within the little bubble he created around me, and my nose brushed his uniform now and then. You're so cold, he murmured, lowering his chin lightly onto the top of my head, like a dragon guarding its treasure, folding its wings to hide it from the world. And you're really warm, I laughed softly. Emicham. Perfect balance, Brandon said. Because no one had ever been able to smell my pheromones growing up, I didn't have much practice repressing them. Every now and then, a little slip leaked out. Brandon inhaled all the way through the commute, equal parts tortured and blissful. He wanted to restrain himself. He also desperately wanted more. Morning. We weren't even on campus yet, but students already greeted him. Walking beside Brandon, I watched him stay cold and dismissive toward everyone else. Was someone like him really capable of hurting an Omega? Did you eat breakfast? Brandon asked suddenly. I brought milk and bread. He clicked his tongue softly. What? I asked. Nothing. Self-study hadn't started yet, so I carefully opened my bread and began nibbling at it. Tiny bites, cheeks puffed like a little hamster. Brandon stared. His gaze went from bright, to dark, to something almost sticky with intensity. Before I could react, he took my milk, pushed in the straw, and held it to my lips. Thank you. I took a sip, still chewing. I only finished half before my stomach gave up. You're done? He asked. I planned to throw the rest away. What a waste. Brandon took the bread and milk himself, ate everything in a few quick bites, then crushed the empty package and tossed it, straight into the trash can. Alan, sitting in front, watched the whole thing. His expression twisted. He looked like he wanted to say something, and then decided against it. I tilted my head and stared at Brandon for a few seconds. What? He asked. The morning bell rang. I turned away. Nothing. Class time. I opened my textbook and started reading. Soon, I was completely absorbed. When I finally finished a passage and looked up, I met Brandon's eyes. Focused, overbearing, shadowed, and with a hint of something close to obsession. My heartbeat stumbled. My mother's warning echoed again and again. Looking at him like this, maybe it wasn't impossible that he'd once heard an Omega. What's wrong? In an instant, he was back to normal. Still not smiling, but looking far more human, his eyes gentler. I want to ask you something. I leaned in carefully. If you don't want to answer, it's okay. And if it's offensive, I apologize. Ask. I won't get mad. Brandon seemed pleased. I moved closer. You? Before this, did you ever harm another Omega's gland? 7. I thought Brandon would snap instantly, but surprisingly, he didn't. His expression remained unchanged, while Alan, sitting in the front row, went pale. His gaze on me was like he was staring at a corpse. Brandon propped one hand against his forehead, speaking in his usual even tone. What have you heard? Come on, tell me. I lowered my head. I don't know the full story, someone said. So you believed it? I shook my head immediately and clutched Brandon's sleeve anxiously. No, I didn't believe it. Even though I'd only known Brandon for 2 days, I wasn't blind. His temper wasn't exactly gentle, but he could never do something like that. Maybe you should believe it, Brandon said, lowering his gaze to his book. What do you mean? I should believe it. I did damage an Omega's gland. Brandon glanced at me from the side, voice flat. Scared? I froze, slowly releasing my grip on his sleeve. Not because I was afraid, but because I could feel I'd upset him. I'm sorry, I said. No need, he replied quickly. If you feel uncomfortable sitting next to me, just switch seats after class. Alan stared daggers at me, his expression screaming. Who do you think you are? Do you even realize the trouble you're in? I stayed silent. Brandon lowered his lashes. The long sweep completely hid any emotion beneath. Morning self-study ended, and I still hadn't spoken. Brandon shoved his hands in his pockets and swaggered out of the classroom. He didn't come back all morning. When lunch break arrived, the classroom mostly empty, Alan stomped right in front of me, a few of his lackeys trailing behind. What? I asked. What do you mean, what? Alan was incredulous. You still want to stand here blocking the way? Move. I didn't budge, gripping my desk tightly. Don't force me, Alan growled. He wasn't exactly gentlemanly toward Omegas. Everything about me irritated him. He probably wanted to kick me out of the school entirely. I pressed my lips together stubbornly. Alan planted a heavy kick on my desk. The desk lurched violently, toppling over with a loud crash. Books, pens, water cups scattered everywhere. 8. Brandon didn't make me move. Why should you? I shivered slightly, trying to stay calm. Honestly, I was terrified. For over a decade, I had been invisible in class. I never approached troublemakers like Alan. I was so scared I might actually become a victim of school violence. But I couldn't bring myself to move. If I did, it would all be over. David, you don't really think just because our boss seems easygoing, you can walk all over him, do you? Alan stepped onto the fallen desk, leaning in, daring to speak everything he wanted. I curled into myself, back against the wall, mentally preparing to take a beating. What are you doing? The classroom was empty for lunch, so Brandon's voice carried clearly. I looked up. Brandon was standing at the doorway, brows knit tightly. Alan twisted his head. Boss, you're back. He signaled to his lackeys to gather my things, so Brandon wouldn't get agitated. Brandon held a bag in his hand, standing in the doorway, meeting my eyes. After a long pause, he let out a quiet click of his tongue and called softly. David, what's up? I asked. Hungry? I froze. Brandon lifted the bag. Packed lunch for you. Red House stir-fry. Want it? Red House was an upscale restaurant near school, tasty and expensive. For some reason, the casual tone made my eyes sting. I also regretted asking such an inappropriate question earlier, and felt wronged for being knocked over by a desk when I hadn't done anything. Yeah, I'll eat. I stood. Before we leave, clean this place up. Understood? Brandon looked at Alan. His tone wasn't heavy, but Alan shivered anyway. Understood, Alan muttered. It wasn't until Brandon and I left together that the other students began murmuring. Whoa, holy crap, holy crap, holy crap, crap my ass, I muttered in my head. I've been telling you to study harder, not just yell crap when something happens. Alan stomped his foot. Why are you staring? Pick up the mess. Does the boss really not care? Someone whispered. Did that transfer kid put a spell on him or something? I was sitting in the front row, almost expecting another bloodbath, but Brandon just said one sentence, and the situation was handled. Strictly speaking, he didn't order me to move. He simply let me choose. Brandon's temper and gentleness had no overlap. As a kid, he was just impatient, sometimes irritable. The real reason he hated and avoided Omegas came from that past incident. 10. You know my pheromones are intense, Brandon said as we walked side by side down the stairs. He was half a step ahead, then spoke suddenly. I froze for a second before realizing he was explaining. Before you, I couldn't handle any Omega's pheromones. Some are sweet, pleasant, but I only ever found them nauseating. So during my sensitivity periods, I always took suppressors. But that time, someone took them from me. Brandon came from an extraordinary family and carried the strongest pheromones. He was destined for the top of the pyramid. No matter how overbearing he appeared, countless people would fawn over him. An alpha's sensitivity period was the perfect opportunity to manipulate him. If he lost control and marked someone, they could hold him accountable. But Brandon would never let anyone control him. He despised losing control. Even without suppressors, his pride would carry him through. Except that person didn't play fair. They stole his suppressors, drugged him, and even brought in an Omega in heat, locking them alone in a room together. It was almost designed to push Brandon to the brink. Yet he endured. The Omega wouldn't give up, trying to press their gland to his mouth. Brandon, barely conscious, pushed them away. The Omega smashed a mirror intended for other purposes. Shards pierced the Omega's gland. Brandon didn't want to talk about it. It was a dark stain in his life. But rumors twisted the story. It became Brandon intentionally destroyed an Omega's gland in heat out of spite. He didn't bother explaining, let the rumors spread. It kept foolish Omegas at bay. Yet who could have guessed he'd one day meet an Omega he actually liked? Brandon stopped walking and glanced at me. What's that expression? He muttered, tongue pressing against the roof of his mouth. Annoyed, or afraid of me? I hesitated, tugging his sleeve and leaning closer. Brandon spoke just as his nose caught the wet, foggy scent of my pheromones. The fierce, burning flame hissed and died down, leaving only the faint smoke. I tentatively released a bit more pheromone. Does this make you feel a little better? 11. The cool, damp mist curled around Brandon, and I tilted my head slightly, looking up at him with wide, expectant eyes. His Adam's apple bobbed several times. The fingers of his hand hanging at his side twitched, and finally, he couldn't resist. He lifted a hand, pushed aside my slightly long bangs, and removed my glasses. In his eyes, I wasn't some dim star hiding behind the moonlight. In my eyes, there was an entire dazzling galaxy. What are you two doing? The director of studies roared, tiny legs running furiously from the other end of the hallway. In broad daylight, at school, kissing? Have you forgotten all the school rules? I turned toward him in confusion. Director, you misunderstood. Brandon as calm as ever. My deskmate had a lash in his eye. I was just helping him blow it out. Do you take me for blind? I saw you two kissing. The director, seeing it was Brandon, couldn't be too harsh. He softened, trying to reason. This is school. It's a place for learning. If you want to date, at least wait until you're off campus, okay? Could people really fool themselves like this? I was still a little dazed, but realizing he thought Brandon and I were dating, my face immediately flamed. I frantically waved my hands. We're not. Director, you really misread it. Cough, cough. The director cleared his throat. Alright, go ahead. But don't let this happen again. I wanted to explain more, but Brandon just grabbed my arm and walked away. Not explaining. I stumbled after him, voice barely audible. He wouldn't believe you anyway. I had worried the director might call my parents, but Brandon suddenly stopped mid-step. The next second, I smelled the pheromones emanating from him. Not like before, there was an almost imperceptible hint of losing control. I hesitated. You. Brandon closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and shoved the lunch bag into my hands. You go to the cafeteria. I'm going to the infirmary. Before I could even respond, he strode off. 12. At the infirmary, the doctor injected Brandon with a suppressor. What happened? You usually have such perfect self-control. Brandon's control over his pheromones was nearly obsessive. Outside sensitivity periods, even an Omega in heat barely affected him. He hummed in response. Emotions have been a bit unstable lately. Just smelling David's pheromones a few times, and my usual control started to loosen. Brandon had a vague premonition. The next sensitivity period would be rough. By the time Brandon returned to the classroom, I had finished lunch. Since the books had fallen, they were a little dusty. My slight OCD kicked in, and I carefully wiped the dirt away with wet wipes. You're listening to Omegaverse Tales Studio, a YouTube channel dedicated to captivating short stories. Let's continue. Brandon walked over, without a word, and swapped our textbooks. Use mine from now on. His textbook was still brand new. It hadn't even been opened. You okay? I frowned with concern. Yeah, Brandon replied, rubbing his brow. I'll nap a bit, I didn't sleep well last night. I raised an eyebrow in surprise. My pajamas didn't help. Brandon muttered softly, too much stimulation, caused insomnia. What did you say? I didn't hear. Nothing. He closed his eyes. That nap lasted the entire afternoon. At first, he obediently rested at his own desk, but the deeper he slept, the closer he leaned to me. I watched as his head slowly crossed the center line, his whole upper body tilting toward me. Alan in the front row glanced over from time to time, clearly wanting to comment but holding back. Not wanting to disturb Brandon, I kept shrinking my own space, finally pressed against the wall, unable to move any further. Brandon leaned a bit more, accidentally resting his head on my arm. Perhaps afraid of losing his pillow, he gripped my wrist tightly, as if worried I might escape. My arm had been pinned for the entire afternoon, numb by the end. Alan hissed, eyes roaming over me, filled with some kind of awe. Want some candy? Alan had a good sense of timing. He probably felt he'd been a bit harsh at lunch and now wanted to make amends. I almost refused. I didn't like overly sweet things. But seeing Alan's cautious expression, I felt it would be rude to reject him. After a moment's thought, I took it. Thanks. He offered to unwrap it for me, so thoughtful. I popped the candy in my mouth, moving it around with my tongue. Brandon, half awake, opened his eyes to see my cheeks puffed out. He squinted, reaching over to tap me. What is it? Candy, I said. Want some? I intended to let Zima give me another piece, but Brandon stared at me for a long moment. He reached out, curling a finger toward me. Confused, I leaned closer. My words stopped. Brandon gently held my chin, tilted my head slightly, and pressed his lips to mine. His tongue flicked, guiding the half-eaten candy straight into his mouth. 13. The noisy classroom instantly fell silent, like boiling water freezing midair. Not tasty. Brandon frowned in slight distaste, but didn't spit the candy out. He was fully awake now, a large, lazy lion stretching, one hand propping up his jaw as he watched me. After a while, he looked away, only to glance back at me moments later, muttering softly, "Damn, how can someone be this cute? Too cute." I froze, stunned, only able to stare at him. I quickly dropped my gaze, frantically opening my textbook to pretend I was absorbed, but the crimson spreading across my cheeks, ears, and neck made me feel like I was burning alive. Especially the gland hidden under his black hair. It seemed to swell slightly, as if waiting for some alpha to inject their pheromones, a permanent marking. Brandon fully woke now, scanned the room, and the classroom instantly returned to its chatter. Everyone pretended to be talking normally, but their inner gossip engines were ablaze, itching to interview the two of us. Brandon thought for a moment, then got another candy from Alan, offering it to me. Upset? I'll make it up with one. I lowered my head further, almost burying myself in the textbook. You shouldn't do this. My voice was barely audible. Brandon tilted his head, resting his head against mine, barely hearing me. What did you say? It's impolite. My ears burned. We're friends. Friends don't do this. Who said we're just friends? 14. I stared at him, stunned. Brandon's tone was commanding. David, I'll be honest. I never intended to just be friends with you. I could understand his reasoning. So far, I was the only Omega who could calm the chaos his pheromones caused. Finally encountering someone like me, of course he wouldn't want to let go. I pressed my lips together and closed my textbook. The classroom was noisy, full of gossiping eyes. Some things were better left unsaid here. So, can we talk about this after school? I suggested. Brandon raised an eyebrow but didn't push further. Fine. The classmates around us looked disappointed. What a wasted opportunity to watch the drama unfold. I had always been calm and measured, never rushed or impatient. But Brandon, he was different. By the last period, he was visibly restless, unable to focus. Finally, after school. So, what did you want to talk about? Brandon couldn't wait to leave the school. He dragged me straight to the equipment room. The school was empty, completely devoid of students. You mean, we're more than friends? I asked, meeting his gaze directly. Was that really what he meant? Brandon looked a little surprised, as if he hadn't expected me to ask so bluntly. Yes, he admitted calmly, taking a step further. We'll take it step by step, friends first, then a couple, and finally. Are you doing this just because you can only accept my pheromones? I hesitated. You don't have to. My expression softened, even carrying a trace of pity. I had been pitted growing up too, but never felt weak because of it. The fact that my pheromones were neutral didn't affect my life. But Brandon, with his overwhelmingly strong alpha pheromones, It was a little sad. He was constantly tormented by his own scent, rarely finding peace. So I understood why I mattered to him. What do you mean? Brandon frowned. You don't like me? I thought to myself, how could someone twist the truth so badly? I mean, I'm not worthy of you. In most dramas, this is the line an Omega uses to give the Alpha the nice card. I was serious. I smiled helplessly. I was glad my pheromones could help him. I swore that whenever he needed it, I could calm him down. But risking your feelings, that's unnecessary. I suspected Brandon was a little dizzy from emotion right now. The difference between us was obvious to anyone. Brandon was destined for the top of the pyramid. I was just another ordinary person with nothing remarkable in my years. Likely, decades would pass the same way. Brandon could easily find an Omega whose pheromones matched his perfectly, someone adored by everyone. That would be a worthy match. I needed to recognize my place. 15. Brandon didn't speak. The sky darkened, and I couldn't read his expression clearly. It's late, maybe we should go home. I suggested. You really don't need to worry. My promises always count, he said. I'll always be there when you need me. Do you know what that really means? Brandon finally spoke. I brushed my cheek. Not too bad. I smiled sheepishly. You're my first friend, you deserve it. Brandon snorted. You little fool. Only known each other a few days and you already call me a friend. Was he naive or just foolish? He didn't dwell on that. Walking toward me, he grabbed my backpack and slung it casually over his shoulder. Let's go home, friend. Since he only wanted to be friends, then friends we would be. You don't have to carry my bag, I can do it myself, I said, walking along. You're short because your bag is too heavy. I'm helping you grow. Friends, and you're still personally attacking me? Upset? I could never be mad at you. I'm very patient. After this conversation, I thought Brandon had settled himself, so I felt no burden. I believed our relationship was mutual. He needed my pheromones to calm down. I needed him as a friend. Mutual help, perfect balance. Gradually, people noticed Brandon's temper improving. He no longer snapped so easily, even if someone irritated him. As long as I was nearby, he could calm down quickly. Brandon's underlings, led by Alan, had automatically started treating me like a respected figure. Countless times I had to explain that Brandon and I were only friends. Aha, the respected one says you're friends, so you are. They refused to listen. At first, my mother was uneasy about how close Brandon and I had become. After all, he had a history of harming Omega's glands. But I never stopped praising Brandon in front of her, highlighting his good qualities, explaining the truth. Now, when Brandon visited, my mother at least prepared fruit platters. At least he was treated as a guest, not an enemy. 16. Auntie, hasn't David finished yet? Monday arrived, and Brandon waited at my door for a long time. When I didn't appear, he simply came in. Ha, David didn't tell you? My mother opened the door. His heat is coming. I've been keeping him home these days. Even standing at the gate, Brandon could smell my pheromones spilling out. Not even a suppressor patch could mask it. His throat tightened, and he lowered his head. I won't disturb him. I'll come back in a few days. Don't worry. His reaction isn't severe. It's manageable, my mother explained gently. Brandon nodded, watching the gate close. Logic told him he should go to school. But his body didn't obey, his feet felt glued in place. His gaze kept drifting to the second floor, David's room. He could smell it. He could feel it. That damp, heady scent was spreading. It was David calling him. Brandon's Adam's apple rolled. Sensing his pheromones were about to spiral out of control, he immediately drew a suppressor and injected himself. The scent was temporarily subdued, but barely a moment later, the fire flared again. Calling him, urging him, go to David, go to David, go to David. Brandon pressed one hand to his face, exhaled sharply, and moved before his brain caught up. Agile, he scaled the building using exterior protrusions, climbing to the second floor. The sliding window was closed but unlocked. With a gentle push, it opened. Instantly, David's pheromones poured in, overwhelming Brandon's rational mind. He was forced into a sensitivity period. An alpha's sensitivity period didn't happen automatically, but Brandon had never been forced into one merely by smelling an Omega before. 17. Brandon, I had been lying in bed, trying to rest, when I heard a sound and opened my eyes. My eyes widened instantly. How did you get up here? This is the second floor. Brandon didn't answer. He simply turned around and closed the window behind him. The room was sealed again. Two strong pheromones swirled and tangled in the small bedroom. I tried to prop myself up, but collapsed immediately. What's happening? I muttered, my limbs weak. My body's desire felt heavier than any heat I'd ever experienced. Even a slight movement of my fingers made me feel drenched. The glands on my neck pulsed with heat, compelling me toward Brandon. His breathing was heavy. The moment I reached for him, my rationality collapsed completely. He lunged like a beast. I fell into his arms. Being hypersensitive during this special period, I almost cried. It hurts. I feel uncomfortable, so unbearable, I choked, trembling. Brandon held me tightly, burying his face in my neck and breathing deeply, his tongue tracing the subtly heated glands uncontrollably. Unconsciously, I tilted my head back, a posture begging to be marked. David, what's... Suddenly, the bedroom door was pushed open. My mother's worry turned to horror when she saw our positions. Her voice rose, sharp with alarm. The pheromones filled the room, nearly suffocating in their intensity. Brandon was completely out of control. Anyone trying to interfere, he thought, and immediately pressed me closer, his expression alert. When he sensed my mother trying to separate us, he scooped me up and ran toward the balcony. Husband, stop him, my mother shouted. Downstairs, my father came home just in time. Looking up, he saw me being carried by Brandon, like I was being kidnapped. Without a second thought, he acted quickly to stop us. After the chaos, Brandon was sent home, isolated, and the doctor administered the strongest suppressor to keep him under control temporarily. Without Brandon's pheromones stirring the air, I gradually calmed down. Still uncomfortable, but conscious again. What happened? My mother didn't know Brandon could smell my pheromones. She thought it was just another one of his old issues acting up. I frowned, forcing down the discomfort, and explained briefly. My parents exchanged a glance, then both looked away simultaneously. Anything can wait until the heat is over. 18. Since this had never happened before, Brandon and I both requested a week off. By the end, the special period had passed, but the emptiness of not being marked left a deep impression in my mind. Perhaps it lingered in Brandon's mind too. Even the slightest spark could reignite it. I could feel it clearly. Brandon's gaze on me had changed. Maybe not changed, exactly. Before, he could slightly restrain himself. Now, he couldn't. Stop looking. Embarrassed, I raised my hand to cover my glands, lowering my head to avoid his eyes. Then block it, Brandon said, arm leaning on the desk, his gaze unmoving. How can I block it? It's summer, I can't wear a scarf. I looked up helplessly. Can you control yourself? Okay, I'll control myself. His words were decisive, but his eyes clung to my glands like vines, unrelenting. I even saw him swallow. His possessiveness grew stronger by the day, reaching the point where Alan and the others couldn't speak 2 words to me without Brandon showing displeasure. I vaguely sensed it was the aftermath of the last failed marking attempt. The unfulfilled desire left a lingering emptiness, and Brandon's temper became restless along with it. At this rate, his sensitivity period would arrive again very soon. Logically, I should have suggested he find an Omega, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. At first, I could remain neutral, but after all this time, I found myself selfish. How could I not like Brandon? He was so dazzling, so outstanding, I couldn't help but follow him like a sunflower chasing the sun. I had never felt like a true Omega before. This story is exclusively produced by the YouTube channel, Omegaverse Tales Studio. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to subscribe. But in front of Brandon, I did. Brandon, nothing. I thought to myself, I had originally said I wasn't worthy of him and that we could only be friends. If I now tried to push for more, it would seem shameless and manipulative. David, are you sure you're okay? Brandon asked. I'll give you a chance to take back what you just said. I thought for a moment. Let me my thoughts, make a draft. Brandon chuckled softly. Fine. I'll give you 2 hours. Enough? 2 hours, right until school ends. I nodded. He actually started seriously drafting the response. I had no doubt that the moment I suggested moving our relationship forward, Brandon would agree immediately. But I couldn't stop thinking. Did he really agree because he liked me, or just because our pheromones matched? I wasn't usually sentimental, but with Brandon, I couldn't help overthinking. The class bell rang. Same place, same person. Brandon closed the equipment room door, arms crossed, leaning against it. Draft ready? I tensed slightly. Why yeah, I guess. Then speak. 19. I took a deep breath. My mind went blank. Reaching for the draft in my pocket, I was about to feel relieved I'd prepared, when Brandon interrupted. Forget it. Listen to me first. David, I don't want to play the friend game anymore. Let's be together, with marriage in mind. I froze. You were worried I'd think you're just a passing interest, that I only need your pheromones and not you. But after all this time, have you really seen my heart? Do you think I love you? Who asks that? My cheeks burned crimson. I'm not a mind reader. How could I know? Like this, now you know. Brandon grabbed my hand, pressing it to his chest. Beneath the warm skin, his heart raced. Brandon, so outstanding and composed, was actually nervous. I opened and closed my mouth, but couldn't speak. I slapped the note from my pocket in front of him. Here, my confession to you. It was still a confession. Spoken or written made no difference. I tried to run, but Brandon blocked the door. One hand hooked my waist easily, the other held the draft, eyes scanning it in an instant. Well written. No wonder you won first place in the province. Brandon chuckled softly. I want to hear you read it. Can you? No. Okay. Brandon nodded. And the suggestion you mentioned earlier, have you considered it? Yes. I stammered, panicking. I agree. Good boy. Brandon lowered his head, tenderly kissing my neck. Then, dear David, my sensitivity period has begun. Will you let me mark you? This time, there should be no interruptions.